So I've kind of ruined the joke already by talking about what I was talking about, but welcome to the World Wide Web, guys. This is a handy guide to the internet. I'm Sam LaRussa, and we're going to talk about this cool new thing called the internet. It's going to bring us all together and share all of the world's knowledge, and nothing bad will ever happen with it because we're all great people and we're all great at sharing information, right? And hilariously, that was actually, to some degree, what people thought the internet was going to do when they invented it. That's clearly not what happened. But I will teach you how to find all kinds of information that's on the internet and maybe bring back a little bit of that intention. So this class here is called Right Under Your Nose, How to Use the Internet to Find Out About Anything. It's an introduction to internet research and something called OSINT, which I'll go over shortly. I'm Sam LaRussa. I am a Brandeis biochemistry PhD student, so I'm actually not a computer researcher by trade. I just really love doing this, and it was how I amused myself when the pandemic was really bad last spring. And so just kind of about this class, first off, I'm going to talk about what OSINT is. So this is just the introduction. I'll go into like details after my introduction, but I just want to talk about what OSINT is, what sort of questions am I going to teach you to answer. Then I want to have a discussion about what questions can't we, won't we, and most importantly, shouldn't we answer. So yeah, I did say this class is about how to find anything on the internet, but I'd like to put some little limitations on that for the purpose of trying to do the right thing. So I guess I'll come back to this in a second, but I want to talk about what OSINT is first. So OSINT is open source intelligence, is what it's short for. And this is intelligence in like the military or espionage sense, less so like intelligence as in like how smart you are. And it's about using publicly available information to answer intelligence questions. It's commonly used by the FBI, police, private investigators, and non-governmental organizations to answer all kinds of questions. And as it says in the name, this is publicly available information, so you have access to every one of these resources too. And what this class will teach you about is primary sources, so kind of getting information from where it comes from, how to answer questions what, when, where, and why. And I'm going to put some limitations on who. So I don't want to talk about how to find out information about individuals. I don't want to teach you how to creep on your classmates or anything. And that's for two reasons. First off, there's privacy concerns. Like I said, you have things you probably want to keep private yourself, and we should respect that. And also, there are consequences to making mistakes, really serious ones. The most infamous OSINT failure was on Reddit during the Boston Marathon bombings, and was that 2014? I forget the date. But essentially, the FBI had put out a call for information, and Reddit had decided to pour through publicly available information to figure out who done it. And they screwed up. They screwed up big time, and they wound up accusing a recently deceased man who had nothing to do with any of it. And that was, of course, really alarming to his family and did not help federal investigators at all. So when you go looking for information on people, there are very personal consequences to messing that up. I feel like organizations, governments, and corporations tend to be more fair game. They have teams of lawyers and PR people who can handle that in a way that going after an individual, you just don't have that. And so it's far more alarming. Also, these big organizations, their actions impact all of us every day, whether or not we know it. And so I feel like we should be cognizant of that. So I think getting information about things that impact you is only fair, in my opinion. Of course, I'm sure there are people who disagree with me on that, but I want to kind of set up where I want to draw the lines for this class. Yeah, I mean, I think just so that we talk about it, I want to just kind of have you all in the chat just kind of talk about what you think is ethical to look for on the internet in regards to people, just personally, because I mean, I set out how I think about this, but it's always good to hear what everyone else thinks too. Because let's face it, we've all Googled somebody. We've all done it, if not the least ourselves. But like, where do you think the line is with personal information? I'll give you all like a couple minutes to put that in the chat before we move on. I love the answer of anything they made public themselves, because that sounds so fair, doesn't it? But we'll go into how that's not really what you think it is in a second. I mean, probably shouldn't have looked at my teachers' salaries. I wonder about that, actually. So teachers, like, I wonder, I do, that's actually a good question. And that's something that I really think that's a borderline thing for me, because how much the people in your community, like we have a weird relationship with compensation in the US. I think every country does, probably to some degree, but I don't know. I mean, to some degree that is a social responsibility issue of, like, you know, people you know, whether or not teachers or community members are being compensated fairly for the work they do. I don't know. That one I would say is borderline, and I've never found that sort of stuff intentionally. I have found it by accident, though, because I'll go over that in a little bit. Maybe if at the end we'll have some discussions about something relevant to that. But it's ethical to look for someone's stated views. Oh, I'm not necessarily saying it was a terrible thing to find your teachers' salaries. I think broadly to know what your school district pays teachers might be a good thing, because there's equitability issues, right? If there's a very high paying school district, you're going to attract teachers who want that and perhaps retain teachers better. And so school districts that can't pay teachers as well are going to have worse education potentially, or a very different sort of teacher. And that's a serious community problem. I don't know if that was necessarily a horrid ethical violation. Knowing who gets how much money might be. Yeah, and so like these things, we'll talk about the concept of public information, right? And I wanted to get back to this. So someone puts something publicly on the internet, right? I mean, you can find out a lot about me online. I'm not asking you to do that, but you can. But anything posted on social media, or anything that people intentionally put online, their stated views or whatever, those are probably fine because they're putting it out publicly. But at the same time, say you post a picture with a timestamp or an accidental GPS stamp on there, and suddenly you're getting to things like, you know, where someone is, or you could figure out where they live. Someone posts a picture, you know, if you post a picture of, like, you know, like out your window and it looks like a pretty generic view, you could still figure out exactly where that window is, for example. How do you know what someone would tell you in person? I mean, that's a good question. And I think one thing that this conversation has pointed out, like Ronan mentioned with that being an accident, finding the teachers' salaries, there's information out there that is public that you don't know that they wanted to share. So, I mean, like your address is probably public information. The tax records for the building you're in, the value of it, that's public information. There are things you can infer to that. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. Essentially, a skilled OSINT researcher can figure out where someone lives, where they spend their time, who they're friends with, how much money they make, and that's kind of scary. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind, that, like, just because something is public doesn't mean it's ethical to look at. But that's kind of your own decision, and that's the decision that I think we all have to make with the internet. And like, yeah, someone mentioned like the intent to share information, but like, what if someone doesn't want you to know something? What if they'd feel very violated by you knowing it? Does that make it unethical, or does that just mean that they shouldn't have shared it? Are we going to put that onus on people? Should we have laws about this sort of thing? And we haven't, as a society, reached a point where we actually understand those boundaries all that well. So I just wanted to have this discussion for that purpose. And so I'm gonna move on to talking about not finding out information about people, because that's not what this class focuses on. But yeah, someone said like people will post things that are super personal online, and also people will try to anonymize things, but you can also de-anonymize a lot of stuff. There are steps you could take to prevent that, but just because someone didn't take those steps doesn't mean that you should do that. So my first story is actually going to be about something very different, although it will actually go into those property records I mentioned a little bit. So this was something going on early on in the pandemic that I had found. It was something strange in my own neighborhood. And I have the kids from Stranger Things down here dressed up like Ghostbusters because they found something strange in their own neighborhood. And they didn't have the resources we have to figure out what's going on, although I had the Ghostbusters theme played for me once walking into a room, but that's a whole nother story. So this thing that I found was just this weird empty lot. You can see here, this is through a fence. There's another fence inside of it, and there's this like no trespassing sign in like a really old font. I don't know if like you notice this here, but like that's not what no trespassing signs look like anymore. This is like from like the 1960s or something. So it's really weird. It's a huge empty lot, like just kind of in the neighborhood of Brandeis. And so how do you find out what something is in terms of a location? And the obvious thing is you pull out a map, right? If you want to know what's in a certain place, you look on a map and you go, yes, that's on this street and that's what's there. What we often go to is like Google Maps, Apple Maps, if you're feeling edgy, Bing Maps. But OpenStreetMap is actually, I would say, at least in the US, the map to end all maps. It's the Wikipedia of maps. So it's not like it's going to be completed by a corporation who wants to have complete map information. This is just done by individuals like you and I. And it is loaded with any detail that anyone felt necessary to put onto the map. So if you're, say, walking around Boston and you've had a sandwich and you have the bag the sandwich came in, it's like covered in grease and stuff. So you just want to get rid of it, you want to throw it away. You want to know where a trash can is. Well, if you're walking through the Boston Common, you open up OpenStreetMap, you can actually see that the trash cans are actually all marked on the map. I forget which icon is a trash can, but you can see information that's just not normally on Google Maps, for example. So the first thing I did was open up OpenStreetMap, took a look at this property here, and like just selected the area, tried to figure out what new information I can get from OpenStreetMap. And what I got was actually there's an underground river running through it, and there's this swamp in the middle. And that's it, actually. There's a garbage dump across the street, but nothing really noteworthy. So this was odd. But okay, maybe it's just not something someone decided to put on OpenStreetMap. There's tons of stuff that's not on there. So the second thing I did was I pulled up Google Earth historical data. So this is using Google Earth Pro, which is free, but you do have to download a application onto your computer. It's not something that will run on mobile, and it's a little bit tricky to use. But what you can do is you can pull up historical map data, and you can see here, this is the Seaport neighborhood in downtown Boston. This is 2005, so this is about as early as I remember it. I don't know, I'm old. And it was pretty much just parking lots, and there was like a mud hole where they're putting in, there's just a big dirt pit where they're building a convention center and like some new public transit stuff. And nowadays, well, I guess last year, you can see it's like super built up, lots and lots of new buildings. Those parking lots are mostly gone. And so like this is super useful to see how a place changes over time. There are lower resolution maps you can find. Even this would look pixelated, but they will give you week by week resolution. If you're curious, I can dig that up at the end of the class and we can go over those resources. But this is super great if you want to get high resolution information on how a place has changed. And I pulled up that location I was confused about, and the only thing that's changed since the earliest data point in Google Earth, which was 1995, the only thing that's changed is that there's like a few cul-de-sacs that were built like over in here. I guess they like just stuck some houses back into some part of this abandoned lot. So like some of it was useful. But like other than that, not a whole lot going on. So this is puzzling. And so I started looking through some local resources. So there's a property records database that this was actually, I think, in Newton. So I could pull up their property records database, and it pointed out that this was undevelopable land, whatever that's supposed to mean. Maybe because it's a swamp, but that didn't quite make sense to me. And so I pulled up Department of Environmental Protection filings on this. So the Mass Department of Environmental Protection keeps all of their information publicly. And so this is how I solved my mystery. And this contains contaminated land, former industrial sites, and also current hazardous waste generating locations and what waste they generate. And so the links are here. I'll be sending this presentation actually afterwards, so you can look through this yourself. These are a bit tough to work with, but what I pulled up was that this location, well, next to it, the playground at the school next door had to undergo decontamination actually in like the late 90s, around the same time that the Google Earth image was taken. And it was contaminated with a ton of PCBs. So there are these organic molecules that are particularly carcinogenic and a bunch of like heavy metals, not great to have on a playground. And it's because actually that this was an old landfill. So this was a pre-EPA landfill that once the Environmental Protection Agency had come into existence, it was immediately shut down for doing things like burning tires and just generally having the horrible disposal practices that we had in the mid 1900s. And so they had to clean this site up once they discovered that there was contamination in the playground of this school that was built next door to almost within, I'd say a decade of the landfill shutting down. So not entirely sure what motivated them to do that, but this information was all public and I got to solve this mystery. It's just an old garbage dump. So that's the first mystery I have on here. First problem I solved with this. You can, if you have like any like simple questions, we can put them in the chat. If there's anything more complicated, I'd like to go over it at the end, because I made this presentation short enough that we should have a little bit of time. So the second thing I want to talk about is actually just a technique that you can use to find out some interesting information. And this is something I saw online. I've titled this, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's a predator drone, because during the George Floyd protests last summer in Minneapolis, a government oversight researcher, so one of those non-governmental organization researchers I was talking about before, using OSINT techniques, found this flight pattern over Minneapolis. And this flight tracker also conveniently gave a aircraft identification number, CBP 104, which is an MQ-9 Reaper drone, so an unarmed predator drone used by the Customs and Border Patrol. And they were doing surveillance on Minneapolis using essentially a predator drone. And they could ID it because there was just super weird flight pattern. So any aircraft that's hovering over somewhere doing surveillance is going to have a circular flight pattern, if you've ever pulled these things up. And the site you can use to look at all of this stuff as it's actually happening is ADS-B Exchange. So this site will give you access to the transponders of every large aircraft in the sky currently. And the FAA requires all aircraft flying at over 10,000 feet in most airspace over the US to have an ADS-B transmitter. There are a couple exceptions to this. Hot air balloons, for example, don't have this transmitter for some reason. And yeah, I'll be sending this presentation afterwards, so you can click on all these links and have fun looking through them yourselves. Oh, by the way, I sent out an email and a file early on, like early this week. I hope you all received it. If you didn't, let me know, because that means that you won't be getting this presentation either. So if you could look through your emails if you haven't already, I sent a little puzzle. It's not super important, but I just want to make sure you can all receive emails. I'll also post a presentation to the class resources page, so you should be able to find this. So like I was saying, every aircraft in the US has one of these transmitters, and globally too, there's actually comparable systems in most countries. And this information is unencrypted and publicly viewable for a darn good reason, because you don't want to limit access to safety information. And this is because this is used as a substitute for radar tracking for small airports. So instead of having to put up big radar systems, you can just use these transmitters to figure out where aircraft are and better manage airspace. This includes most military traffic, although I've found recently that a lot of like Black Hawks and things, that like if they're flying in formation, they'll only have one with a transmitter, or they will ID themselves strangely. The lab I work in is actually on a flight path for a lot of like military aircraft for whatever reason. So I'll occasionally just see what transmitters are from these Black Hawk helicopters. This excludes small drones. So there's currently no flight tracking for drones. And there's plans to do this, but it's not going to be available on the internet. It's only going to be like if you're in the local area, which I don't know, it's whatever. I can talk about drones for a while if we want to talk about that at the end. But these trackers tell you registration numbers and the owner of the aircraft, and also let you see past flights. Yeah, consumer drones is what I'm talking about. But really any drone under 55 pounds does not need one of these. And since it flies lower than 200 feet, I don't imagine that a larger drone, if for some reason someone was manufacturing like a 100-pound camera drone for like movie filming or something, they probably wouldn't need to have an ADS-B transmitter either. I'm not sure. But yeah, like, I mean, a Predator drone's an airplane with no pilot. It's less like a quadcopter or something. And so like, that's kind of what I have to say about aircraft, but super interesting to me, at least. And so, again, if you have any questions, I can answer those. I think I've addressed most of them so far. Another thing, so the third story I have is actually not about, really, it's less about things out there in the world and more about things in your refrigerator. So this was a puzzle that my cousin came to me with. She was eating some ice cream and realized it tasted funny, and then realized it wasn't labeled as ice cream at all. It was labeled as something called frozen dairy dessert. I don't know if any of you have encountered this, but it's a thing. And it's kind of creepy sounding. It's just like, oh yeah, this is not ice cream. This is not ice cream. It's literally just labeled as like, it's frozen and it has dairy in it. That's all we can say. So what on earth is this stuff? And to answer that, we have to answer what ice cream is. Bizarrely, well, so food items in the US have legal requirements, and every single US law and regulation is present online. That's not particularly weird. This is also true of all legal cases and court proceedings. So anytime something goes into court, provided the records aren't sealed for some reason, that's all publicly accessible information. And so bizarrely, there is a law pertaining to the definition of ice cream. Actually, most dairy products have laws pertaining to them. This is not true of everything else. But dairy products have a very, very large set of laws on them, which I joke about it being the result of the all-powerful dairy lobby. There's actually historical reasons why I suspect this is the case. But if you look at the Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 21, Section 135.110, you have the legal definition of ice cream. This link will be a little bit tricky to navigate. Like most federal databases, navigating it's hard, and they keep changing the link in the format because, I don't know, that's beyond me. You can't trust buyers. Yeah, so I'll explain why it's a little weird. And that's because ice cream has to contain a certain amount of fat. You can't have under 10% milk fat. Per gallon. So like it's 1.6 pounds of solid to the gallon, and 10% milk fat, I guess, by volume, or sorry, by mass of solid. So if you dehydrate the ice cream. And so if you go below 10% milk fat, you can't call it ice cream. It's not legal. So this is where frozen dairy dessert comes from. It's just low fat ice cream. So if you go to Breyers' website, you can see their nutrition facts for their frozen dairy dessert. This is just their vanilla version, not the toffee one that I had on the other slide. But if you see the serving size is 81 grams, only 4.5 grams of which are fat, which is 5.5%. This is, again, there's like some stuff with solids, but so it's probably a little bit higher than that. It's probably maybe like 50% liquid. So it might even be just 9% fat even. And the one reliable source for information, like I was saying, is really, or what I want to point out here is often the manufacturer's website, although they're obviously going to try to hide things, especially with food manufacturers, they do have to keep their nutrition and ingredient information online now, which is great. But the thing is, when you reduce the fat in ice cream, it doesn't work right. So I've made homemade ice cream a few times, and if you screw up the fat ratio, if you add in flavorings or something that will dilute out the cream you add into it, it won't be creamy, it will actually ice up. And so in order to prevent their frozen dairy dessert from turning into a block of ice crystals, they Breyers uses a variety of different what's called a texturizer. This sounds scary and technical, but like texturizers can be things as simple as gelatin or like comparable additives that just increase the melting temperature, decrease the melting temperature of the ice cream. And also, by the way, gelato is not legally ice cream. It's not, doesn't have enough fat, and the way they resolve that problem is they just store it at a warmer temperature, so it doesn't. There's an actual dairy alliance. Sorry, I just saw that chat. That's awesome. But if you look at the Dairy Foods magazine, which probably has something to do with the Dairy Alliance you just mentioned, the dairy oligarchy, they'll mention that in this was actually an article from I think 2004 or 2006, that Good Humor Breyers, which is a Unilever subsidiary, notified the FDA that they were using these proteins called ice structuring proteins to as a texturizer. And the reason why you want to use these proteins is instead of adding on a bunch of gelatin or something else to the ice cream that will prevent it from getting crystals, you can add a very, very, very small amount of these proteins. And because proteins are awesome, as a biochemist, I am completely biased, but because they're awesome, you need a very, very small amount of it to get the same effect on ice crystal formation. And so you can see in this Dairy Foods magazine here that there's like this, they were like lauding the development of these ice structuring or antifreeze proteins. But if you're curious about what these proteins are going to do to you when you eat them, well, I'm going to say as a biochemist, probably nothing. But if you want to confirm that, you can actually pull up scientific publications on both how it works and also the safety records on this. So I should have mentioned this on the previous slide, but a lot of industry journals and stuff, they have paywalls, so or like a limited number of articles you can view, which is a downside, but you can usually get some information out of them before you get kicked out. If you want to look at, say, the details of ice structuring protein, you can look at a scientific journal. Now, journals are getting better at making things open source or public view. Oh, disabling JavaScript. I haven't tried that one yet. That's an interesting trick. I just try to use an ad blocker to disable the individual scripts that put up the paywall. But that being said, that's probably not strictly speaking legal, so let's not go into that too much. There's another way around this for scientific journals, and that's something called a preprint repository. So if you find a paper that's published in a big journal first, and you can't get into it, you can load up either PubMed.org, PubMed.gov, which is a US government preprint repository that gives you a bunch of information on it gives you a bunch of both information on journals and often the journal articles themselves. So if you see here, if you load up PubMed, there's like this link to the free full text over here in the corner. That will give you the full journal article if you want to try to read through some scientific publications. You can also look at a website called archive.org. Now, both of these, by the way, are completely legal. And what these are is before the publication is accepted by a journal, you can, yeah, I'm not saying that the JavaScript thing is like super sketchy, but it's a borderline thing, and I'm trying to limit this to just stuff that's completely kosher. So you look at, so archive.org, these preprints, what they are is like, they're not peer-reviewed papers. So they're not the accepted version. They're the accepted version of a paper often if you're like, find one that's actually published, but they're before the publication actually comes out. So it's like the journal hasn't actually gotten their hands on it yet. So this is archive, not archive.org, the Wayback Machine website, archive.org, the like chi as in the Greek letter, which they use X. It's confusing. It's this link here, ARXIV. And that is where we keep, scientists keep preprints. So like, I mean, some papers that I've been involved in are on archive.org. And again, so like this is stuff, these are full-on papers. You can read them. Just be careful that you're using ones that have actually been published in actual journals, because there's also complete garbage that has ended up on there. Like one's talking about using magnets to cure COVID. It was, the scientific community was very mad at archive.org for a brief period of time there. They pulled all those journals. There was a spammer who was putting garbage articles on there. There's also other really useful resources, GenBank. So every genetic sequence we know is stored online, publicly accessible. The RSSB PDB, which is protein structures, if you need to do structural biology stuff like I do. And also, if for some bizarre reason you have a DNA sequence, which is actually really easy to get these days, you can verify it. You can cross-reference it against like GenBank, for example, using a program called BLAST, which is just search. It's like Google for DNA sequences, which probably not super useful for y'all, but it's cool to know that that exists, I feel like. So now I'm actually going to get to the archive.org that's not spelled with an X. But first I want to talk about another really useful tool, and that's reverse image search. So like I said, you can search using DNA sequences, but you can also search using pictures. I'm sure you've probably all done this at this point, or at least a lot of you have, where you've learned that you can go to Google Images, you can drag an image into the search bar, and it will pop up with all the places that that image exists on the internet. That's fine, it works okay. There's another more powerful tool called TinEye, where you can actually search using small sections of images. So this is more powerful, uses image recognition, and can search with like little fragments. Bing actually can do this too, I've discovered recently. So you can use Bing image search to search like subparts of images. And there's one, it's only useful for the most part with Russian stuff, but the Russian search engine Yandex is actually creepy good at facial recognition. Like you can use it to, if you have found a person in Russia, a picture of a person in Russia, to find out it's creepy, but it will also do really good. It's really, really good image recognition software. So I'm sure this is totally not the result of some sort of Russian government project at all. Just weird that it's public. So reverse image search, Google Images is what you've all heard of, but is far from the most powerful image search algorithm. Oh, the one concerning thing about Yandex is it doesn't really have safe search. So kind of sketch. But what has been mentioned several times by myself and other students at this point is switching gears a little bit, is archive.org, not the ARXIV one that is for scientific papers. This is for literally everything. This is probably the single most important slide in this entire presentation and the most useful thing I will mention all day. And it is, what it has is this feature called the Wayback Machine, which allows you to access websites that no longer exists. Huh. That's interesting. Yandex being useful, yeah, I guess maybe that is surprising, but I got that from a OSINT website that I'll mention in a moment. But archive.org you can use to find literally any website that hasn't been asked to be taken down. So for one point I was doing an experiment in lab and I discovered that the protocols I wanted were missing. The website, the company website, the company had changed hands like 5 times and I couldn't find the information I needed. I pulled it up on archive.org and bam, it's right there. All the information I needed. It was from like 2005, so it was a real blast from the past, but it's all online on archive.org. And also there's another one called archive.today that saves more of the original website. It's a little bit less respectful of like takedown requests. You have to do like the people need to file a full legal copyright violation with them in order for a website to be taken down. And I think they actually also have a data limit, which is a little bit different, but knowing that there are alternatives to archive.org is useful because also this depends on when they scrape websites. And there was a way that you could prevent archive.org from scraping a website because they're being very polite that archive.today ignored. Archive.org actually came around to scraping websites that had prevented bot access to websites before. They decided that they weren't going to be polite about it anymore because it was probably not the website owner's intention. But there's a period of time where you're probably only going to be able to find information for certain sites on archive.today. So just a useful overview of Internet archives where you can find stuff that has suddenly gone missing. Also, if you perhaps want to relive last year and look at all Donald Trump's tweets, they're on there too, along with the Twitter accounts of most government and celebrity famous individuals who may deny that they tweeted something. So journalists love to use archive links to Twitter, for example. And lastly, this one's a little bit weird as a tool, but so Adobe Flash, no, the Flash problem is entirely different. Hopefully I'm trying to move through, so we have like 20 minutes at the end. I can go over ways you can get Flash to work, but that's complicated. And there's some safety concerns there. But Citation Managers, so when we talk about what I use Citation Managers for, so this is how I keep stuff organized. So remember I was talking about that landfill thing. I also have the Code of Federal Regulations on here. It's a way you can organize all the information you find and save your own little mini archive.org. So you can get a widget for your browser, and it will download the HTML of any web page you click the widget on. And it will just you can organize it into folders just like you can any other information on your computer. It's made though for making citations. So if you need to make a bibliography for a paper you're writing in school, this is the best way to do it because it will do it all automatically. It's completely free. It's open source, and they even give you, if you choose to log in, they give you like 500 megabytes of free backup so you can sync between devices. Super, super useful for keeping track of all sorts of resources, both academic and just because and if you're just like digging around the internet to try to answer a question. It also means that you can retain websites so you don't lose them. So if you notice here, my girlfriend and I actually save our recipes to a citation manager, so we never lose them. Because I don't know, I'd hate to lose. We almost lost our brownie recipe, I think. That was very, very stressful. We had to go to archive.org and then we started using a citation manager. If you're very attached to your recipes, if you do some cooking, that's like a great resource too. So my last story is a doozy. Yeah, and I see, before I move on, I see that there's a couple comments in here. Widely used websites are saved to archive.org, but if it's something obscure, you can ask them to save it. Yeah, you can also ask them to save your butterscotch brownie recipe. You missed out on that if you had that online. Yeah, the internet is a weird thing because it seems like everything is on there, but it's constantly changing and you can constantly lose stuff. So I applaud the Internet Archive team for working on that. So my last story is not something I did. I have no affiliation with anyone involved in this. I found all this online, and it's just super interesting and shows you the power of the techniques I'm talking about here. And this story involves a very infamous plane crash, the downing of MH17 in 2014 over Ukraine. The investigators are an organization called BeltCat, which is an independent OSINT collective. They're essentially a group of volunteer internet sleuths. I think a few people there are paid, but a lot of people there are just volunteers who are curious about, or who are passionate about keeping the world honest using the internet. So some background. So in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, which is this region of Ukraine right here. And this was following the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution, where the pro-Russian government of Ukraine was ousted in favor of a government aligned more with the European Union. Russia responded by sending in troops to Crimea and the Donbass region, which is over here. So this is Crimea. This is Donbass. And they claimed that these troops were not Russian troops, but Ukrainian rebels. So all of these troops were completely unmarked. And then on July 17th of 2014, Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 was shot down by a surface-to-air missile from a Buk missile launcher. Now, the Buk is a Russian system, so you'd think, oh, well, maybe this is this is clearly something that happened with these Russian troops, but you have to remember that being aligned with Russia for a very, very long time and being a former Soviet state, Ukraine had a ton of Russian surface-to-air missile systems. So this was not actually all that clear-cut. So how do you answer this whodunit? So the question is, are these Russian troops actual rebels in the region? So there were, to give Russia some credit here, there are individuals living in the Donbass region who are ethnically Russian and want to be part of Russia. So there are actual rebels there, and there's also Ukrainian troops. So who did it? So the first thing that happened was that the BeltCat team, as well as reporters for the AP and The Guardian, tracked down that there was a large missile carrier in town. So locals reported this to AP, Associated Press, and this was carried on a white flatbed truck. So this is just like a civilian truck with the numbering on it scraped off. So you see here, this might have been a 3, completely unclear here, and a 2. So they call this Buck 3X2. And this was very much in the region where the plane got shot down. So this is definitely the smoking gun. And so where did this missile carrier come from? So immediately Russia tries a disinformation campaign. They tried to blame Ukraine because, again, it was plausible. And they clearly lied because they said, no, this is a video we have of a missile launcher in this location. And it was immediately obvious that the location was completely false to at least to the BeltCat team. And so how did they know that those pictures were false? And how did they know that the pictures of the missile launcher in the region where it was reported how do you know that's real? And so the simple way you can geolocate a picture is that most phones these days add GPS tags as metadata to photos. You can turn this off, and I do. But this means that pictures posted to social media, certain social networks, Instagram strips this off, but others will have these location tags on there. So, okay, you had a GPS tag on there. Except you can fake that. So that's not clear if you're dealing with a foreign intelligence agency. I mean, I have the software on my computer to fake the GPS tags. Because I screwed up some timestamps at one point. But you could absolutely fake this. So how do you know for sure that the picture was taken where it was taken? And the way you do that is you cross-reference that with existing photography. So Street View images, so like Google Street View, that's all over the world. And so you can use those images to cross-reference with a picture. So this picture here of a different armored personnel carrier on a truck, someone has sent this in with a GPS tag on it that turned out to be accurate, but how do you know where this truck was located? So the BeltCat team said, okay, we're going to look at things like the stripes on the road. So if you see here, this stripe is actually worn down in this pattern here. You can see on Google Images. So you can see that these line up pretty well. There's like a scratch there. There's like this dark patch at the front of it. So they could match up that these were actually the same stripes. And there's also this mile marker back there. You can kind of say, oh, that's in the same place relative to the stripes. And there's a power line back there. And so you just start pulling together this information and you can build a picture of where a picture was taken based on the minimal information in it. Most pictures is much easier. So you post a picture walking down some street, you have got houses behind you. You might have contrails from a plane. You might have a street sign that would be very obvious. And you could just go, oh yeah, you're at the corner of, Pine and Main. Like, it's like you got, like, literally the sign says that. And it's like, Springfield House of Pizza. And then it's pretty obvious, but you can do it with really complicated images like this one here. This picture was just posted to social media. This was a Russian social media site, VKontakte. This whole walkthrough of this brilliant image locating stuff is actually at this link here. You can look at on your own time when I send this presentation to you. Super, super interesting, but it's a very dense document, and I won't waste much more time on it. So, all right, so now we can tell where the missile launcher was. We can tell kind of where it was going because people will post pictures to social media. So you can kind of start building up a time-stamped path that this thing was taking. But how do you keep track of the darn missile launcher? So just like tracking a picture to a location using little details in the picture, you can track a missile launcher using details on the vehicle. Now here's that 3x2 picture I was showing you earlier. And here's another picture taken, actually, this is an earlier picture of the 3x2 missile launcher. And then this was taken the day of the shoot down. And the BeltCat researchers figured out that these missile launchers have a really clear fingerprint to them. And that's these rubber side skirts above the tank treads. And so they get worn down in a very particular pattern as they're used. And since they hadn't been replaced since it was shipped over the border from Russia, you can see here that this was exactly the same missile launcher. There's exactly the same scrape pattern if you align them. And so this was used to track that missile launcher's origins to Russia, refuting the claims that this was not a Russian vehicle. And so that's kind of the end of that kind of investigation. They did other things too to track this down. So the individuals driving that flatbed truck were kind enough to post constantly to social media. So they were able to track the driver's whereabouts as well as who he was, because they could use that, you could use facial recognition, and like started doing OSINT on this individual to track down exactly who it was. He was a Russian soldier, and it was the whole thing, by the way, was an accident. This was a confusion. The guy actually had posted, a commander had posted, like, oh, we shot down this Ukrainian transport plane, you know, something about like, you know, go rebels. And then like a few minutes later deleted the post after he realized he'd shot down a commercial airliner. Really dark, messed up stuff, but you could find it all. It was all publicly online. Weirdly, this actually, the reason I found this was I was doing a class about espionage in Russia. And had stumbled on this being really complicated, and then BeltCat's research helped me put together a convincing case for a different splash class. So finally, as like part of the actual structured presentation, I just want to talk about some tools to keep yourself safe online. The least of which being how do you get rid of that information on a picture? So you can turn off GPS tagging on your phone. I will send links to resources for this when I send out my presentation. It's just a setting on your phone, and then you no longer have geotagged photos. Photo editors, so my favorite being this program here called Raw Therapy, can just be used to strip off all of the metadata. So if you download this program, you can actually just go over to like this last tab here, and there's like a metadata copy mode thing. You just go get rid of all the metadata, and like suddenly it's not going to be set. It won't include what kind of camera you used, won't have the timestamp, and it won't have GPS tagging, among other things. Super useful if you're posting pictures to websites that retain metadata like Flickr or Tumblr or some social media still. I think Facebook stopped, but Twitter might keep it. Plus, I mean, who knows if they're logging it before they delete it. I don't know if I trust those websites all that much. If the photo stays on the phone, the geo information doesn't go anywhere now. I don't think so. And I actually I keep GPS tracking on my phone so I can figure out where I take my pictures, because I keep the timestamps, so I can just like line them up. Yeah, it makes it easier to sort through pictures. And I being insane, manually geotag my pictures afterwards. Well, not manually, but like I'll tag it with like just text of where the location was, like locally on my computer. But that's also because I don't want to link. I do a lot of photography, and I only recently got a camera that could GPS tag things. So majority of the pictures I cared about weren't. Oh, signal. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about this slide in a second. But yeah, so that's a whole. That's a trade-off you have to make, is what level of convenience versus security are you willing to do? And provided you're aware of it, I mean, I don't see any problem with that. I have 150,000 photos. I said I was insane when I'm tagging these things. Yeah, 13,000 is one thing, but so how to be safer on the internet. So one thing you can do is every website you connect to. So Zoom, for example, right now knows where you are. It doesn't know where I am though, because I use a VPN. And VPNs, you have to be careful though, because the VPN might know where I am. So Zoom doesn't know where I am. Facebook doesn't know where I am. Google doesn't on my computer. Google knows from my phone. But so this is VPNs are good because they they mask where you are, but they can also log your traffic. I use one called Mulvad that seems to cater to the absolutely privacy paranoid. I'm not all that paranoid, but it's cheap as any other VPN and doesn't have a data limit, which is neat. And you can like literally shove cash in an envelope and they'll take that as payment, just a little bit insane. I don't know much about NordVPN. I know that they're a big company. And the thing is, like, I have to trust that Mulvad is not logging my traffic anyway. They don't necessarily have my name because I could pay in a way that doesn't log that. But that's something you have to be aware of. For the most part, though, I mean, you're limiting it now to one company, trusting one company, so you just pay attention to what they're doing. Another option is Tor. Will NordVPN accept cash stuffed in an envelope? Yeah, Mulvad's a weird company. They're based in like Switzerland too. So I'm like ship. No, sorry, Sweden. It's like I don't know if I want to ship cash across state, like across internationally. It just seems sketchy to me. I feel like there's something illegal about that. Tor, on the other hand, is a free, like super VPN. It routes it through 5 different computers. So, but they're all these, they're just random people using these computers. So this can be compromised, but and there are rumors that governments are running servers on Tor to compromise it. But it's harder to do because at the end of the day, these are still randomly assigned. So even if there's a governments have compromised Tor, there's a chance that you have found just linked through a bunch of random computers. It's harder to compromise it. And also, like, if governments are doing that, they haven't released how they're doing it. So they have a trade-off where it's like, if you're a spy, you don't want to reveal how you do it. So like, if you are doing something that they're not really all that concerned about, there's a whole game going on there. Encrypted messaging is actually rolling out farther now than it was when I made this presentation a few months ago. Well, it's a year ago at this point. There are options to send encrypted messages. Signal is the biggest of them all. So it's actually the guy who did WhatsApp. One of the guys who did WhatsApp actually felt bad about selling out an encrypted messenger. And so they made this new one called Signal that's backed by a nonprofit. So there's no corporate money. It's not a corporation. They're not trying to make money off of it. Yeah, it's a good redemption arc of that guy there. And Signal is like the go-to encrypted messenger. This is how I text a lot of people. It's neat because for me as an Android user, it's almost like iMessage. You can pull it up on your computer and stuff, but as someone pointed out, it's hard to export information from it. Sometimes the messages get all confused because a lot of information is stored locally. But it's a very solid encrypted messaging application if you're willing to give a cell phone number to them. Proton Mail is an encrypted email service. There's some questions over how secure it is. So I'm not going to say like, oh, that's the best place to go if you have a great big secret. Proton Mail actually does not require a cell phone number anymore. It just requires that you give them an email address, and then you can just find burner email sites online if you really want to be like super paranoid. Another thing you can do is just encrypt files yourself using an open source encryption program like Veracrypt. I would always go with an open source application for encryption stuff like this, because it's been found that there's a lot of backdoored closed source applications that have not been properly vetted. So this has been a problem in the past. Veracrypt's great though, if you just want to like encrypt your computer. So for me, I encrypt my laptop because if it were to get stolen, I'd prefer that only my laptop got stolen, not the data on it. So these are just like a bunch of different ways that you can be safer online. And some additional resources are BeltCat, Citizen Lab, who has a bunch of cybersecurity resources, and they do some OSINT work themselves. I'm a big fan of the Darknet Diaries podcast, which talks mostly about cybersecurity and penetration testing, which is where people try to hack into somewhere as they're employed by a company to hack into them to test their security. And a couple of those episodes involve quite a bit of OSINT work. So 2 episodes of interest, if you're interested in OSINT, are episode 80, which is called The Whistleblower, and then episode 66 called Freaky Clown. It's just the guy's username. And those are just pretty interesting if you want to learn more about OSINT. And so, yeah, that's all I have for like the main class, but I believe we still have 15 minutes. Is that correct, Jennifer? Yep. All right. So if any of you have more complicated questions now, I would love to answer them, or we could have some fun and just try to find things online that I haven't found before. Thoughts on DuckDuckGo? I use it. I don't know. I don't know if it's not how great it is. I mean, they're still ad supported. They're just a Bing backend, so you're using Bing and hoping that they just route your traffic to Bing in a way that, like, I don't know. Oh, did any of you try the puzzle I sent out? Did you all get it? Oh, crud. Okay, so I guess this is like I would check your spam. Sometimes these things work improperly. It's also posted to the class page. Did any of you manage to finish the last question? If you tried it, because the last one is you did. If you didn't, I'd like to know. I mean, I'm just curious at this point, because that was a problem I actually tried to solve. Yeah, the extra ones were hard. The first few were real softballs, and then the last one I did deliberately because it's awful. Huh. That actually might be ballpark. So I don't know if, yeah, for drones. So the last question is about the Waltham Police Department. So the city of Waltham has the worst website I have ever had the displeasure of navigating. And this is where I need to know if I have to, like, say, pay taxes, for example. So the fact that it is an absolutely horrible cesspool of a website annoys me, but they also have a bunch of information on there that is super useful. Yeah, it was less than $101,000, and it was the Waltham Police Department buying drones is the answer to the last one. So, Yet DuckDuckGo still manages to give me garbage results. Someone goes, DuckDuckGo's websites are compilation of over 400 sources. Yeah, I mean, you see down there, I've got my little Mulvad. Oh, look at, the website looks a little bit better than it used to. This was a debacle, the train horn thing, but you don't need to know about my local government stuff. So if you go here and search drone, so the reason I looked this up is because, yeah, so if you just search a drone on the Waltham Mass website, you actually get this, oh, go away screen sharing thing. You can actually pull up the drone purchase record for the Waltham Police Department. So they purchased 10 drones. This was the bid, and then the final result is just this one short thing. It was actually, so it was less than 100. It was actually only $80,000. They spent it on 3 large and 7 small drones. I don't know what that means. However, I think I've seen one in the middle of the night. I don't know what they were doing, and so that's kind of why I brought this up, because this was like a local problem for me. I was like, what on earth is this drone? And the police department hasn't mentioned that. It was from this website, this company here, Florida Drone Supply. Like I said, manufacturer websites are great to figure out like what ones they got, what ones they probably got based on how much they cost. I think the large ones are DJI Matrice M300. This one here is what I think I saw in the middle of the night. Thing's freaking huge. Probably with an IR camera, which would come to about, so they spent $80,000. Oh, sorry, they spent $103,000 total. $80,000 on 3 large drones. You gotta be putting some IR cameras on them. So this is kind of like how I go digging through information. I literally went to the Waltham website, typed in drone, did exactly what I did. I've got like 9 minutes. If y'all have questions or like just an idea for me to go looking for, I would love to try to show how this actually can go down, because it can get really complicated pretty quickly, finding stuff online. But anyone have any? I thought it was just 2020 that they got these drones. It was 2019. Wow, I can't read my own sources. Yeah, look at that. I think they finally received them in 2020. I think they had like a news article. But fiscal records. The fiscal records are awful to navigate for this. So bizarrely, though, you can find the. I found my landlord's water bill on here when I was looking for something else entirely. The fiscal records, though, aren't super detailed. Yeah, special equipment. I thought they would have put it under photographic equipment, actually, but I'm not sure. So we have, do you have anything you want to look up? Any questions? Thought I could have a little bit of fun here. I'm going to send the presentation through email, yes, and I will post it to the website too. If you don't know how to do that, do I have any weird stuff to look up? Oh, the first extra challenge, I'll send the result to all of that, but it was what's called a track geometry car. So it's so this is neat. So rail fans, so something I didn't mention, fans are obsessive. Train fans are really, like, every single train car in existence is, in the US at least, is cataloged on websites like this. So if I go to CSX Railroad, so if I go, they even have a bulldozer on here. They literally keep track of literally everything owned by the, yeah, so like literally I have a reason, I respect him with a reasonable amount of fear. Yeah, so here's like a bulldozer owned by CSX because they couldn't even just track, they couldn't just track just the train cars because that would be too easy. Okay, you know what? We're just going to cheat on this. I'm going to pull up my own photo records database and pull up my trains. Because I'm not going to waste more of your time on this. Oh, so I can throw this over on my screen. So I use a program called Digicam. Make you sound like you're training future hackers. No, I just want to show you how to find stuff. I'm not teaching you how to hack anything. I don't know how to hack things. I'm not a hacker. I'm just a researcher. I just figure out how to find information. So if I could, this is my own photo records. So if I go to, I use a program called Digicam, and this allows me to tag photos with whatever the heck tag I want to. So I've tagged all of my photos of trains, and if I go in through here, should be, actually, let me go search. Yep, I know there's 5 minutes. So if I go to, and this is kind of a pain, but the thing is that thing, what that train car is, and I'll show you in the, why do I need so many train pictures? I have a lot of pictures of everything. I'm just an obsessive photographer. This is my own thing, but I have a lot of friends who are train fans, so I do take some sort of rail fan photos. But that train car, essentially what it is it's just a box car. It says do not hump on the side because there's a way that you sort train cars by putting them over a lump of ground. They call it just a hump, and they just, like, instead of using a train to push them around, they just roll them down. And since it's got fragile equipment in it, they don't want it like smashed into other train cars. That was the whole story there. But that was a picture I had taken, and it took me a while to figure it out. And so I gave you one of the worst ones and wanted to see if you could figure it out yourselves. Yeah, so yeah, the railfan thing. There's one other interesting thing I can show you in like 4 minutes. Oh, let me show you. I think it's, let me go to the BeltCat website. BeltCat is awesome. And they have a bunch of tutorials. So if I search here, I want to look for this website I found. Sentinel Hub, yeah. So if I go to, so this requires, okay. No, this isn't the one I want. I think it's Digital Earth. So BeltCat will give you like, how do you track climate change, changes in temperature? How do you track, how do you confirm satellite imagery? Digital globe, that's what I want. So this is how you can view historical satellite imagery. BeltCat has all these tutorials. So if I rush through this, you get like a map, and then you can, if I can just like draw a rectangle for Boston, will give me all their historical image data. So you can look. But like, this is their most recent information on Boston, for example. Start unchecking things. You can pull up just satellite images. So this is like the kind of information that Google Earth buys to make their imagery. But what you can do is you can look through now individual satellite images of the world with timestamps. They don't give you the full resolution though, so that's why I was saying it's not super useful. But BeltCat has a bunch of tutorials on how they use this to track like wars, human rights abuses, deforestation, plant cover, all kinds of stuff. And so like, this is kind of like this like super Google Earth that you can use to find historical information. So that's kind of like, oh my God. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I've got. I will send along an email with my presentation shortly. And thanks for coming, and I hope you enjoyed this class.